Dear class, welcome to this interesting module on intellectual property rights and fundamental freedoms. One of the common theoretical assumptions behind the grant of intellectual property rights is that without propertization, you cannot provide sufficient incentives to create. The argument is, in a sense, an extension from the real world and the property doctrines that exist in the real world. The justification for grant of property rights in respect of physical resources has been largely that arising from the tragedy of the commons. This tragedy works in such a way that if resources are not given to the custody of private hands, over time there is going to be an inevitable situation of underuse and overexploitation. Garrett Hardin, in his seminal work on the tragedy of the commons, explained this using a grazing land. And he argued that if there were no private property over the grazing land, every person would be free to come use the land, and the moment this happened, it would result inevitably in a free riding sort of situation. Nobody would feel responsible for the land, and everyone would use it or try using it, exploiting it to the hilt. Over time, the land would go to waste. In the case of intellectual property rights, largely due to the non-rivalrous use of these resources, it is not so much a worry about the existing resource going to waste as much as people being unable to invest in the creation of future resources. The non-rivalrous character of intellectual property rights is such that when I write a book, anybody else and everybody else is in a position to reproduce that book without hindering my usage of the book. Especially in the world of digital communication, whatever content is created can be used by all and sundry without in any way impacting the physical existence of that particular work. The work is not going to go to waste simply because 1,000 or 1,000,000 people copy it. It is going to remain the same, but what happens is that the commercial value of the work goes down. And when the commercial value of an existing work goes down, it sends the wrong signal to those who wish to invest or create invest or create. Yeah. So the argument goes that you create intellectual property rights in order to tackle the problem of dynamic inefficiency, that is, inefficiency over a period of time. The other strong theoretical and conceptual framework within which intellectual property rights are justified is the propertarian argument, or what we call property absolutism and property essentialism. Two ideas that we get from the time of Blackstone. Blackstone was a common law scholar in Great Britain who wrote in the 17th century, and his treatise on property and the common law are considered seminal works in the field. Blackstone conceptualized property as the sole and despotic dominion of an individual. So if something is your property, then you have absolute control over it, and you can regulate whichever way that property is being put to use. Interestingly, the United States Supreme Court, in the context of copyright law specifically, expressed the idea that it is the engine of free expression in 1985. And from here comes the theoretical framework that forms the basis of this particular lecture. This is the democratic paradigm expanded upon by Neil Netelin. So Neil Netanel, in some of his path-breaking works, including his famous book Copyright's Paradox, examines the contention of the court and whether there is any real substance or any real work being done by this expression, engineer-free expression, by this statement. He looks at copyright from the vantage of three different functions that it serves: its production function, its expressive function, and its structural function. The most important one for our purposes is the expressive function of copyright, where he argues that one of the main uses of copyright is that it puts in many more works out there. It increases the volume of creative work. So the incentive is not purely a proprietarian one, not meant really to give an incentive to the creator as much as an incentive to society or a benefit to society. And this benefit to society is because of the large volume of works that we have. The benefit to society is also because of the different avenues that the copyright market sustains. Avenues such as, for instance, YouTube, avenues such as non-controlled or non-centralized methods of communication like a blog, and so on and so forth. To Netanel, the different avenues of production and the high volume of works that are created as an outcome represent this particular engine, the engine of free expression. Now, where does all this fit in the Indian context? In India, the Constitution specifically provides for a freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a) and the right to carry on trade under Article 19(1)(g). Now, as we have seen, structurally, intellectual property rights in general and copyright in particular work through a system of exclusive monopolies. So this system of exclusive monopolies is such that once the copyright belongs to you, you have absolute say over the manner in which your work is put to use. The natural consequence of this is simply that through exercise of such absolute control, you can stop others from using your work. With copyright, this becomes particularly a problem due to the expressive nature of content. Many a times, people today do not wish to use your work only as consumers. YouTube is a classic forum where most of the work that exists on the ground is used, transformed, rehashed, modified, and we have new works which are based on the existing work but which are really not the existing work at all. Again, the fact that you have created a work should not give you a monopoly over ideas. It is only your expression that should legitimately entitle you to protection. So in all these different and interesting ways, copyright law comes into tension with free speech values. And this is exactly what Netanel was trying to bring out through his theory of democratic paradigm. So how do we make copyright law the engine of free expression? There are two important things here. One is to ensure that copyright law itself internally works in such a way that it encourages the creation of new works with more expressive potential. And two, copyright law or the monopoly that copyright law offers should not extend in such a manner that either by way of its duration or its scope, it ends up completely curbing expressive activity. So in this lecture, we will look at some of the important copyright law doctrines and judicial approaches to copyright law that have tried to address both these concerns. But we are not going to stop with copyright law. We are also going to look at trademark law. Even in trademark law, as I go on to explain in the course of this lecture, there is a fair bit of tension between trademarks that are granted to commercial vendors or providers of goods and services, and those who wish to use the trademark for orthogonal purposes. By orthogonal, I mean use of trademark for parodies, use of that particular trademark to compare it with another trademark and to provide information to consumers. Again, there is a classic conflict between free speech and monopoly rights here. Finally, what about the right to carry on trade? Yes, indeed, trademarks are meant to protect or further your right to carry on trade, but can that right to carry on trade under Article 19(1)(g) of the Constitution come in conflict with another individual's right to carry on free speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a)? This is again a source of tension. Even within the Constitution, within two rights under or two freedoms under the same provision, we see an inherent tension. How do we resolve this? Again, courts have given responses, if not full, at least partial responses to some of these issues, and we are going to discuss them as well. So with that, let's dive straight into the copyright doctrines, the ones which are most important in preserving and furthering free speech and expression under Article 19(1). The first such doctrine is the idea-expression dichotomy. This is indeed paramount to the very existence of copyright. The idea that one who creates a particular work, whatever it may be, a literary work, a dramatic work, artistic, musical, that person is entitled to his contribution, which is the expression, and not to the underlying idea. This dichotomy serves two important purposes. One, it ensures that the extent of ideas remain constant or can be built on further, but they are never diminished. So if we have 100 ideas currently, the fact that someone has used one of these ideas to create a particular work does not render us with only 99 left in hand. The second reason is that copyright law is a mechanism to stop somebody else from copying what you have contributed. And your contribution is not the idea, but the expression. The expression is the way you communicate. And in a Kantian sense, Immanuel Kant is one of the philosophers who really explained this using the notion of a speech act. So from a Kantian sense, what we are speaking about here is a direct communication between the author and the audience. And the creative work or the expression is the way in which that communication occurs. Copyright law protects that communication, it protects that expression, not the underlying idea from which that expression was born in the first place. An interesting decision of the Bombay High Court where this issue came up is that of Indian Express newspapers versus Jagan Mohan Mundra. Here what had happened is that a particular incident, very unfortunate incident involving the rape of a woman, was subsequently made into a film by Jagmohan Mundra. Indian Express newspapers claimed monopoly, and by monopoly I mean copyright, over the newspaper report, and they alleged that Jagmohan Mundra had done nothing but used the facts disclosed in the newspaper report and then gone on to make a film. The court rejected the contention of Indian Express newspapers and the request for an injunction stopping him from proceeding with the film and damages and so on. And the court clearly held that in respect of facts which are present in the public domain and which were used for reporting by the Indian Express newspaper, there would be no copyright. Copyright would only exist in respect of the actual mode of expression, and which clearly and admittedly Jagmohan Mundra had not copied. This doctrine assumes particular importance in the case of factual works, though the modicum of originality required for a work to qualify for copyright protection is pretty low, and the standard even post the decision in Modak is still that of minimal creativity, or rather minimal skill and judgment. It is a pretty low standard. Despite that, the big question is, can anything pass? And there the answer is no. Ideas cannot. Even if you need to meet a very low standard of originality, there has to still be some originality. Ideas, no. Expression, yes. Expression of low originality, yes. Not expression without any originality, and not ideas. There cannot be monopoly in respect of these. In the case of factual works, this assumes particular importance because most of the effort is in unearthing facts and less in the expression. So it is only to the extent that you put in effort for the expression that you get your copyright protection. What is the relevance of this doctrine to free speech? The relevance is simply this. When it comes to facts, when it comes to ideas, when it comes to matters in the public domain, everyone can make use of it. And what happens when more people make use of things which exist in the public domain? We have more content. And what happens when we have more content? Let's go back to Neil Netanel and his democratic paradigm in the expressive function of copyright. The expressive function of copyright is served better. And through this, copyright becomes an engine of free expression. Let's take a similar doctrine, the doctrine of merger. The doctrine of merger is a little different from the idea expression dichotomy. It is different in the sense that here we are looking at the copyrightability of a work rather than the mere scope of copyright protection. The idea expression dichotomy goes to the scope of protection in the sense that we say that the scope extends or covers only the expression and does not extend to the idea. But in the case of the merger doctrine, we are essentially saying that there is no copyrightability at all. So in what situation does it arise? The merger doctrine applies in situations where there is a unique or core idea and there are limited ways in which you can express that particular idea. For instance, you have the weatherman. The weatherman tells you that it rained yesterday night. What are the different ways in which he can tell you that rained or is going to rain tomorrow? What are the different ways in which the weatherman can tell you that it's going to rain tomorrow? Well, he can say that tomorrow, such and such date, we are going to witness rain, or tomorrow in this particular locality there is going to be rain. But the essential point here is that there are 6 or 10 different ways. There are very finite and limited set of ways in which you can convey this particular idea. Therefore, copyright law uses the merger doctrine to say that the expression and the idea have merged in this situation. And once the expression and the idea have merged, there is no copyrightability in respect of any of these forms of expression. So none of them are entitled to copyright protection. A variant of this doctrine was recently used by the Delhi High Court in Emergent Genetics. Emergent Genetics is an interesting case where the issue was that there's a seed manufacturing company which alleged that some of its ex-employees had virtually used its data to reproduce the same kind of seeds. So in a sense, the copying here was that of the genotypic information which is generated due to the DNA structure of the seeds. The Delhi High Court held that nobody could claim a copyright monopoly over the genotypic information for the simple reason that the DNA structure was something found in nature. It was found existing in nature, and even if it was altered, the alteration was on something that was found in nature, and the alteration was inevitably a biological product. Therefore, granting anyone copyright monopoly over this biological product would in effect stop anybody else from recreating or reproducing that product. And the court also interestingly observed here that there was no patent protection for this form of process. This was a non-patentable process, even as the Patents Act goes. And this being the case, the court applied the merger doctrine in an interesting way to say that in case of ideas such as this, where there are very limited ways or probably just one way of expressing the DNA structure, there cannot be a copyright monopoly in respect of that to any one individual. Moving on, copyright law's duration for the protection is again an important way in which the public domain is kept alive. By saying that you have protection for life of the author plus 60 years, the copyright law is also making a negative proposition, which is that you do not have copyright protection for life of the author plus the 61st. In the 61st year, you run out of protection. So the moment a work runs out of protection, it is free for everyone to appropriate. And this is another interesting way in which copyright law ensures that the engine of free expression is kept moving. The public domain is an important component of the engine of free expression. Again, as we recently saw this interesting case where a particular selfie or a collection of selfies were taken by a monkey. There too, the argument is clearly that this is something found in public domain, because works found in nature like sounds of animals or acts done by them and so on cannot be enclosed within copyright monopoly. This is again a part of the public domain. So through all of this, copyright law ensures that third parties are free to exploit anything that is present in the public domain, and through that exploitation we have further works of art. Like for instance, Vishal Bharadwaj used 3 Shakespearean plays which were found in the public domain to create 3 interesting and important films. So the same underlying logic, to the public domain in general. Finally, we come to the most important aspect of copyright doctrine, which protects and preserves free speech by placing a limitation on the monopoly. So in that sense, from that underlying angle of limiting the monopoly and thus keeping the engine alive, we have the fair use doctrine. So in India, the fair use provision works in a certain way, and we could better call it a fair dealing provision for that reason, which is that there are enumerated exceptions in section 52 to the copyright monopoly. This structure is different from the structure followed in the United States, where, though yes, of course, there are some enumerations, the way the fair use test works is through a 4-pronged factor-based analysis, and the 4 factors are pretty common, and we will get to them soon. So the fact that we follow this enumeration model does not necessarily mean that we value free speech less. In fact, courts have used the different enumerations from time to time to build on the story that we have thus far narrated, that of copyright being an engine of free expression. For instance, let's take section 52(1)(a)(2). This provision exempts from the purview of copyright infringement any fair dealing with a work for the purposes of criticism or review of that particular work or any other work. This provision came into play in Civic Chandran versus Ammaniyamma, a case where there was a counter drama produced 40 years subsequent to the original drama, and the allegation was that the counter drama violated the copyright in the original. The court said that indeed the provision used the expression fair dealing, but fair dealing had to be assessed based on not just the quantum of the work that is copied, but also other factors such as the purpose for which such copying took place, and most importantly, whether the subsequent work was a rival to the earlier work, or it was in a genuine sense a criticism or a review of that earlier work. Applying this particular test, the court concluded that there was indeed a fair dealing, though there was quite a bit of reproduction of the original, because the later work never intended to compete or replace or substitute the earlier work. It was a genuine criticism. Now you can clearly see how important this provision is to preserve free speech values underlying copyright law. Though there is a monopoly here in respect of the original work, we still give room to someone to create orthogonal works that criticize them, that review them, or as we will now see with 52183, works that report certain events and affairs, including the reporting of a lecture delivered in public. Here we can quickly look at the decision in Delhi TV Limited versus ICC. In Delhi TV Limited versus ICC, the court made a clear distinction between programs that are created for pure commercial purposes and those that are meant to report the happening of an event to the public. The court said that while the former required a license from the owner of copyright in the sporting events in question here, cricketing events being the subject matter of this particular dispute, when it came to reporting live scores and so on, there was no requirement of a license. They could take video footages and put it as part of the general news program. There was nothing wrong with that. But news channels could not run a program which was based entirely on some of these cricket matches and have advertising slots and make money out of that. Basically run commercial programs that could substitute for the watching of the match or its highlights by the spectator or by the audience. So through this, the law again makes it clear that there is a free speech interest in getting to know what goes on, and news and reporting are important dimensions to this free speech interest. Similarly, in Acuate Internet Services, the court has rejected the argument of the cricketing body BCCI and ICC that they have exclusive monopoly over the scores of a cricket match as conveyed live or immediately after the event has occurred, what they claimed to be a hot news protection. Even here, the court made it clear that granting a monopoly over hot news or the live scores would result in curbing the dissemination of information to the public at large. It was important that the public got access to these live scores not only through licensed providers of BCCI or ICC or whichever other body, but through any other person as well. So if somebody wanted to do this as a commercial operator at lesser charges, there was nothing wrong with it, because indirectly the benefit would go to the public. There are many more ways in which they get to know what is going on, and nobody can claim a monopoly using copyright law or any other property regime over these uses of information. Finally, we come to that part of the fair use doctrine which deals with the teaching exceptions. Till now, we were operating in the realm of looking at exceptions that made use of the content for a specific purpose, whether it's criticism, review, reporting, etc. In some situations, you make use of the content without transforming it at all. And the most important of such exceptions is teaching purposes. The provisions involved here, such as section 52(1)(I) and 52(1)(A)(1) and 52(1)(A)(J, ensure that works can be reproduced for instructional purposes. Of course, there is considerable controversy relating to whether these provisions, especially 52(1)(I), are bound by a fair dealing requirement, or whether there can be indiscriminate reproduction. This is a matter currently pending before the Delhi High Court in the context of the Delhi university photocopying case, and we will not know the answer till the court decides one way or the other. But having said that, the provision serves a very important free speech value. So through a joint reading of all these different provisions in section 52 and the different copyright doctrines, it emerges that copyright law is not just about monopolies, it's also about access. And most importantly, it is about access of a certain kind, the kind that serves the expressive function of the law, the kind that results in more works being created and more people able to use existing works to create new works and communicate through such speech acts, to use the Kantian expression, to a larger audience. So today it is incorrect to say that copyright serves only the incentives function, or that copyright is nothing but property absolutism or property essentialism. There is a strong democratic paradigm operating here. With that, let us quickly proceed to the less important aspect of this lecture, the free speech values in tension with trademark. One of the important cases here is the recently decided Delhi High Court decision in Tata versus Greenpeace, a case involving the popular Greenpeace game Tata versus Turtle. Tata's contention was that Greenpeace, by using the Tata name as part of its game, was effectively violating the Tata trademark. The Delhi High Court held otherwise, and while doing so applied the concept of parodies, the genuine parodies that make use of a trademark to mock a particular work, and the not so genuine ones which in fact are using the trademark as a matter of association with their own products or services in order to get visibility and probably even to confuse the consumer eventually. The court felt that Greenpeace's use was as a genuine parody here, and the value that drives this exception in favor of trademark parodies is nothing but free speech. The court felt, and it relied on some of the decisions of the South African Constitutional Court here, like Laffitoff Promotions and so on. The court felt that no monopoly can go to the extent where, when someone uses that particular trademark for an orthogonal purpose, which is to criticize that particular brand, there is a violation of the trademark itself. The trademark was purely a commercial right, a business right. It was a business signifier, and when not used by the other person as a business signifier, there was no reason to block the use of that particular mark. However, the court's views have been, one can't say diluted, but there is a fair bit of conflict as to the unanimity of judicial opinion on this particular exception. And the reason is simply because of some of the later decisions, one by the Supreme Court and another by the Delhi High Court itself. The Supreme Court decision was in Prakash Jha Productions, uh, Bata versus Prakash Jha Productions, where there was a certain song used in a particular movie directed by Mr. Prakash Jha, uh, where the song made reference to Bata, and the argument was that it portrayed the Bata brand in negative light. The Supreme Court interestingly passed an order which could be best classified as a sort of via media order, where the court said that they must, that is, the film must, run a disclaimer saying that there was no intent to cause harm or injury to the reputation of the brand. This is a somewhat strange order, probably born out of pragmatic considerations largely, because it is inexplicable as to why somebody should run this disclaimer once it is found that it is only a genuine parody which is not meant to be uh, taken as an indictment of the brand as much as a criticism of some of the extreme versions of globalization that we have today. The court went even further in the subsequent decision in Hamdard National Foundation versus Hussein Dalal, where the court basically granted an injunction when the name of the brand Roof Afsa was used in a jovial fashion. It was basically part of a joke in a blockbuster movie. And the court said that you have to basically remove the reference to that particular brand altogether, and this clearly is, in my view, an incorrect decision. It falls foul of Article 19(1)(a). It is somebody's expressive function to use brands that exist, whether it's a popular brand in the social media space like Facebook or Orkut, or something in the physical goods space. I mean, it is nothing but a humorous take on that particular brand or what it does, and there is absolutely no reason to stop that. And this is where we come to the last phase of this lecture, where we look at comparative disparagement, because here too we see that the court is in some sense trying to regulate the way in which people criticize brands. For instance, the important decision of the Calcutta High Court in HUL versus Unilever, where the court makes this distinction between portraying your brand in the best light possible and making a serious comparison between your brand and the other brand. The court says that the former is fine but the latter is not, and that raises the question, aren't consumers entitled to know whether there are serious problems with somebody else's brand when compared to yours? If it's a misstatement, then there are already remedies in the law to address that misstatement. But what is the basis to make this distinction between portraying your goods in the best manner possible and not comparing your goods in a serious fashion with that of another? The court does not seem to have a strong conceptual answer. So, in some of these cases, it emerges that the court is not in a position to accept free speech values the way they are meant to actually function in society. The court is not willing to give them their real due. And to that extent, these decisions are problematic. Decisions such as Hamdard National Foundation versus Hussein Dalal, or HUL versus Rakit Benkisar. These decisions really have to probably be reconsidered in the light of upholding free speech values and not allowing intellectual property rights to override these very important values. So, finally, one can conclude that when it comes to copyright law, there are interesting and important doctrines which currently protect copyright law. from an allegation of overriding free speech. But with trademarks, uh, the position is still 50-50. In some respects, the court does protect free speech values, but in some other respects, the court does not. Thank you.